Welcome to episode number 33 of the Lawrence University Career Center podcast. I'm Ty Collins, and today I'm joined by Rebecca Zornow from the Lawrence University class of 2010. Rebecca earned degrees in English and art history while at Lawrence, completed internships with the Riston Art Gallery, the History Museum, and worked off campus at a local restaurant. After Lawrence, she worked for 2.5 years with the Peace Corps, also then at the Trout Museum, the Building for Kids, Valley New School, and Appleton Monthly Magazine. Today, she's very busy with multiple roles, including the founder and operator of Fox Delight, which hosts fantasy events in Appleton. She's also a book coach with Conquer Books and is best known as a science fiction author, which we're going to talk about today at length. Rebecca, thanks for joining us.
Ty, thanks for having me. It's been about 1.5 decades since I've been on campus, so I'm excited to dive in and talk.
Rebecca, you've done so much since leaving Lawrence, so I'm not sure where to start. So let's start with approaching this by industry. The early portion of your career was very museum-oriented, with internships and jobs at the Building for Kids and the Trout Museum. How did you get interested in that kind of work, and how did Lawrence prepare you for that?
So I'm a writer today, but when I started at Lawrence, I knew I wanted to do a double major in English and art history. And I thought that art history would be the launch of my career. I planned to work in museums. I had a strong fascination with art, and the museum world seemed like just this beautiful thing that you could dive into and do so much with. And the English side of the double major, I thought would be just for me. I loved reading. I always thought that, well, being a better communicator doesn't hurt anything. And so it was kind of split in half between what I thought I would do professionally and what I thought I was doing just to fulfill a passion area. Lawrence was a great space to dive into museum works with the Riston galleries here. There's so many great local museums and other nonprofits right on College Avenue or even in the greater Fox cities. And having those spaces to step off campus, practice some of those skill sets was really invigorating in terms of thinking about museum education, and how we're connecting all of this great academic work to the broader public.
I do work with several students interested in pursuing museum work and museum careers. What's your advice for them as they get started in that line of work?
I probably have 3 pieces of advice. One would be to go to a ton of museums in as many cities as you can. I think it's really interesting to see how museums treat the visitor experience differently, see what's really trending in the museum sphere, how are they being more inclusive, and really thinking about how museums are connecting with the public. You just have to go to a lot of spaces to see that in action and find out where you want to be in the museum sphere. And then for myself, what kind of led me away from museums was 2 questions I really had to ask myself. One was, did I want to go undergraduate school? And I ultimately decided not, at least not at this time. And for a lot of jobs in the museum sphere, a graduate degree is a base requirement. And so that really shifted what I was looking at museums. But then also thinking about the space that you're going to be living in, the coasts, even Milwaukee and Chicago have so many more diverse museums. I didn't totally plan on spending my adult life in Appleton, but when I knew that that's where I was leaning, then I began to think about, well, how many museums are here realistically? Is that the route I want to take? And I had also sensed within myself, I was really driving myself more and more to the writing side of my brain.
Less than a year after graduation, you were off to Africa for a 2.5-year stint with the Peace Corps as an education and youth development specialist. Most everyone I've spoken with who've worked with the Peace Corps has described it as being transformative. Can you talk about your experience with the Peace Corps?
The Peace Corps was transformative, and it started here at Lawrence because as a senior, I was trying to think through, okay, what is the next step? And there was a returned Peace Corps volunteer who came here and gave a talk. And then even just seeing the flyers in main hall, parlez-vous français, even a little kind of promoting the Peace Corps, the idea of taking some of your skill set, especially language requirements, and bringing that abroad. And I knew that I wanted to travel. And the Peace Corps seemed like a really good fit for me because it's independent. You choose what projects you're working on. You have a lot of time where you're directing your activities and your interests, but there's also this wonderful training and safety net of the Peace Corps that they're going to make sure you know the local languages. They're going to make sure you know how to wash your clothes in this new environment, ride public transportation, what the staple foods are. And then if you have a medical emergency or there's a political emergency, like you have a team that is focused on knowing where you are and getting you out of that. And being in the Peace Corps was a long time and a short time at the same time, because when you get there, it's such a different experience. I served in eSwatini, which is a kingdom in southern Africa. I was a youth development volunteer at a rural primary school, and it was a completely different culture than what I had grown up around. And I led a library at the school. I started an art club with students who had done little more than doodle in the margins of their notebook. And the real focus of my time there was so many adults, so many parents had been affected by the HIV/AIDS epidemic. And there's a very strong population of orphans and vulnerable children. So it was about making schools centers of care and support, trying to fill in some of those gaps that had emerged during the epidemic. It taught me so much about cross-cultural communication. I had a lot of time where I could read, focus on writing, journaling, writing letters, and really connecting with people who welcomed me into their community. Shifted my global perspective, and that's something that I draw upon as a science fiction writer now, thinking about new cultures or species meeting. Like my Peace Corps experience has flooded into every aspect of my life.
We will get to your writing shortly, but I want to talk about one other thing that you currently do, and that is you founded and run a science fiction and fantasy event company. What's that about?
It's called the Fox Delight, and it is a magical tavern that opens here in Appleton, Wisconsin, every sixth full moon. And it is a fantasy ball space. And so what that means is individuals come in crowns and ball gowns or cloaks and masks or cosplay, whatever fantasy costume they want to don, and they come for a night of live performance where we set a story with actors and then individuals quest up and down College Avenue, kind of like a murder mystery party meets, Lord of the Rings. Like you get to be a part of the story. And one of the things that I do for the Fox Delight is I've written several of the scripts, so it blends really well into my writing. I'm a science fiction writer largely, and this was a way for me to test out writing in a fantasy space, test out a new genre, and also build community here locally. A lot of my time is spent on a computer drafting and editing, and I was feeling a real need to, get out there, do things in person, build a community here. And so the Fox Delight has really helped support that desire.
All right, I want to hear more about this. So walk me through an event. This is every sixth full moon, you said? So Lawrence students would want to do this. I know they would. So how do you sign up? What's an event look like?
Okay, so one important piece of information for Lawrence students to know is it's a 21 plus event. We host every 6 full moons. Our next event is in October of 2024. And you sign up ahead of time to attend the event. And then about a week before it happens, we do a magical coin pickup, because that magic coin is what serves as your ticket into the magical tavern. You flash it at the door. If you leave for a quest and you return, you flash it to our troll security guard again. And then the evening kind of follows. Like for the start, we have a fantasy tavern equivalent of a cocktail hour. We have magicians roaming, we have performers, we have live music, we've had harpists before and folk singers, but you're roaming the magical tavern, connecting with friends, visiting the bar, getting some good food. And then we have our first live performance, which is when our actors come out on stage. And remember, this is like you are just going to the tavern and things happen around you. So it is very much the storyline is, something probably has gone wrong that night. There is a spell we need to break. There is a dragon rider who is coming for an event. There is the Lady of the Wood shows up and beseeches the crowd to help her on her quest. So the actors come out, they set the quest, the main storyline for the night with their first performance. And then all of our guests go up and down the avenue to secret locations to collect clues, to interact with other actors and performers, and then bringing it back to the Fox Delight Magical Tavern, where we have our second performance that kind of wraps things up. Members of the audience can, share what they learned along the route. And then at the end, it's just we have a DJ and we have a big dance party and we all look, fabulous and awesome.
How many people take part in this?
Yeah, about 100, 150 people take part. It's a good size because, if you come as an individual, every person I've seen who's come alone has found other friend groups to link up with. People have even gone on to play Dungeons and Dragons, after the events. But it is also big enough that you feel like, okay, I'm really in this community. I can kind of move around the space. One of the things we like to do is mini missions and gossip cards, where you can draw a card that gives you a secret piece of either a clue or a mission that only you are going to complete. And you can move around the space and maybe put some of our levers into action, and that will actually have an impact on the events of the night.
That sounds very fun. I'm going to watch for your next one coming up in October. Let's talk about your writing now. You have published 3 science fiction books so far. You're working on a couple more right now. Let's talk about your career as an author, how long you've been writing, what your books are about, and just kind of give us a behind-the-scenes look at the life of an author. Also, why is science fiction your thing?
So remember, way back at the beginning of this conversation, we were talking about museums. I went into the Peace Corps, I came back, I did some museum work, and I started to feel a bit of a drift. And before I had gone to the Peace Corps, my sister gave me a journal, and she said, okay, you're going to keep the journal while you're over there. I'll keep one while I'm here, and then we'll switch when you get back. Oh, and we're going to make this into a book. And before that, as much as I loved reading, as much as I found fulfillment in my English major, it had never occurred to me that, I could be one of those types of people who writes a book. And so that was the first seed where I started writing. I started thinking more critically about what I was writing and starting to think about, is this a possibility? When I left the museum space, I did some freelance articles. I became the editor-in-chief of Appleton Monthly magazine to give me more editing experience, to build my network. And so even though I had this big dream of becoming a writer, I was trying to be strategic about how I was getting there, how I was gaining that experience, how I was trying to find out what kind of writer I wanted to be. And in 2021, so after the pandemic, I published my first novel, It's Over or It's Eden. And that was my big pandemic project. We all had something that we put our time into. And for me, I had written several books that had gone into a drawer. And I got this idea while standing in the shower, thinking of all the movies where Earth wins the war against aliens and how unlikely that would really be. And then I had this moment of this soldier and how she lives in a world where we've lost this great war and we've been invaded, we're being colonized perhaps. And what does that mean for her? When you lose something so big, such as your own planet, how do you keep going? Because a character's story never stops. If we have that big moment at the beginning of the book, well, she has to go on and do something else. And I began writing the story, and I flew through it, and I realized that I was definitely writing in the right genre for me, science fiction. And a lot of people do ask me, well, why science fiction? Because it is, a lot of times when people meet me, they think that maybe I write memoir or nonfiction, or maybe I write historical fiction or, romance. But science fiction is such a sphere where you can have the adventure and the fun things, but then it's also a genre where you can do the thought work of thinking through, well, if we decide this about our world, what does that mean in 100 years? Well, if two cultures meet, what sorts of cultural mishaps might they have on a space station? Well, if this is the way that we are dealing with stressors in our current society regarding gender equality, regarding politics, what does that mean for us decades from now? Or how would I like to see things different? Or how would I like to think about those things? And so it really becomes a space where I'm writing. I like to write exciting books that I would like to read, but it's also a reflection of, well, what am I thinking about at the moment? What am I, struggling with? How are my characters dealing with similar things?
Which does lead us right into my next question, which is one of the hallmarks of science fiction is the ability to address contemporary issues in futuristic settings. Star Trek is well known for this. In your displacement duology, one of your characters is an Indigenous woman living in the environmentally fractured United States. Are you trying to address Native American or environmental concerns here?
Yeah, I'm a descendant of the Forest County Potawatomi tribe. And when I was writing that book, the first book is Dangerous to Heal, and the second book is Negotiated Fate. It has multiple point of view characters, kind of like Game of Thrones. I really enjoy reading books or things like Outlander, where you see a lot of different perspectives. And at portions of the story, they take place here on Earth. And looking into the future, I tried to think about, well, what voice would fit with that story? What sorts of issues do I want to talk about? And it's really interesting because science fiction means different things to different people. And for Indigenous people here in North America, we have seen an idea of an apocalypse. We have seen the ends of, not the ends of people, but the ends of certain ways of living. We have seen a huge amount of government interference on the lives of Native people. And so with that character, Lozen, I felt I could give her a voice, reflect some of the culture of my family, and provide her as a balance to some of the characters coming from off-planet.
I love that. It's fascinating that you're able to address things like that and bring up even a personal story in a science fiction setting. I was wondering if you could take us through the stages of writing from conception all the way to the end, and I imagine there must be some times when you get stuck or you just don't want to write for a period of time. Can you describe how that all works?
Yeah, and this is good because I haven't touched on, well, what does a day of a writer look like? And so thinking about a project, usually I have an idea in my head for a couple months, and you can have multiple book ideas, of course, at the same time, and you're trying to evaluate, well, which one do I want to spend, a year, maybe 2 years, a lot of time and energy, and what has legs, what is just a kind of passing curiosity. So I hold those ideas in my head for a long time, and I schedule out in advance, okay, the first month I'm maybe going to focus on research if it's set during a certain time period, if there's technology, if there's theories or ideas I want to dig into, compile my research and write an outline. Many writers sit down and they start writing and just see what comes out. I'm definitely a planner, and not that everything goes according to plan, but it gives me a lot of confidence at the beginning of a story to have an idea of where I'm taking things. My outlines usually catalog how many chapters I expect to have, what kind of happens in each chapter, and then at the same time as I'm building the outline, I think through who are my main characters. I write up some little biographies or character sheets about them. Sometimes I'll build a Pinterest board or collect images. It's kind of like you have this very ambiguous abstract thing, and you're doing whatever you can to pull those little pieces in to prepare to put it down on paper in black and white, just little squiggles on a paper that's going to convey this huge image to another person. Once I'm done outlining, I will draft, usually for about 3 to 4 months, depending on how long the project is, where I am just working my way through the first draft of the novel. I start at the beginning, I try and go straight through to the end. And if there's something that I don't know or something that changes, I just make notes along the way. I try not to get too caught up in the weeds early on, where if you go back to chapter 1 and then you go back to chapter 1 again and then you go back to chapter 1 again, sure, maybe you're polishing that up, but you haven't made the decisions that you need to make later in the book to really understand what needs to be in chapter 1. And then after I draft all the way through to the end, I take a break, usually a few weeks if I'm in a busy time with other projects, a month if I can swing it, just to get fresh eyes, to think through some of the challenges of the draft, to decide if there's more research I need to do. And then I go back and I do developmental edit, where you are essentially focused on the big building pieces. Are there chapters I need to delete? Are there chapters I need to write? Oh, this character started as this name with this job, and by the end of the book, they're a totally different person. How am I going to rectify that? Streamlining things so that it could make sense to another person. One of my favorite quotes about writing from Neil Gaiman is that the second draft is to make it seem like you knew what you were doing all along. Usually you don't know at the first draft, and that's okay. It's that way for every writer. And then at that point, when I feel like I've pushed the book as much as I can, I get a developmental editor involved, somebody who can read it through, write comments, build an edit letter, give me some perspective on what's working, what's not working, and then I'll do the same same thing for the line edit phase, which is where I narrow in towards, making sure that dialogue is really smooth and polished, deciding those final setting details, getting all of the prose lined up, making sure it has rhythm, thinking about how it sounds, reading it aloud to myself to see what that feels like. And then I'll have another editor go through it to look at it at the sentence level, make those tweaks, corrections, challenge me by saying, hey, you said that this character, their motivation over here was this. Why then are they contradicting themselves in chapter 38? And then we move outward from there to working with a copy editor and then a proofreader. I produce my own books. I'm an independent author, which I really enjoy because it does give me so much flexibility, so much control over my schedule. And what I do then is I just hire a team of professionals, people that I trust to help design the cover. I, do a lot of the admin work myself, but anything that I'm not sure how to do, I'll kind of decide, well, is this something that I want that skill set? And then I'll invest time in learning it. Or is it something that I can outsource to save me some money because that's not a skill that I'm ever going to be interested in picking up? But the average day for me is when I wake up in the morning, I do journaling for about half an hour every day. And that sometimes is about my books. Sometimes it's clearing my head with things from my personal life. Sometimes it's writing lists and notes. And then after that, I'll usually have a couple of hours where I'm either drafting a book, editing my own book, or I also work as a book coach. So I work on a variety of other writers' projects in the speculative fictions, so science fiction and fantasy. And so at the beginning of the week, I'll plan out, well, what am I working on each day? I try to make sure I take lots of breaks, go for lots of walks, get time away from the computer, and then I save those marketing and admin tasks for in the afternoon where I've, maybe exhausted some of my creative well and I can kind of focus on little tasks to knock out. There's definitely days where you feel like skipping the writing, or the writing seems hard, or it seems like maybe you're writing and it's all just garbage. And I think that setting goals and treating it like it really is a job helps me get those things done. We all have times where we need some rest and we can take that. But though I never want to burn myself out, I do also really force myself to treat this as a job with a regular schedule, to think through if I miss writing today, what does that mean for how I feel at the end of the year if I don't get a book out, or if I don't, finish this editing project by the end of the month and whatnot. Usually it seems with writer's block, because I work with so many other writers, helping coach them through their writing process. It's usually not necessarily about the writing or the story. It's usually about something else that is going on. Perhaps they feel nervous about sharing their story with other people. Perhaps they feel nervous about telling other people that they're a writer. Perhaps they think that they're not good enough or creative enough or smart enough to run this writing idea. There's usually something else going on that makes people dampen their dreams or feel like it's not a priority. And I think coming around to, well, what's really happening? Are you getting burnt out on something else? Are you, struggling with a technical thing? Because a technical thing is fixable. You talk to other writers, you read a lot of books, you can think through those things. But I find when somebody goes through a serious period of writer's block, it usually has to do with the uncertainty they feel about, well, what am I going to do with this book? How am I going to feel if I do get it out in front of eyes?
You mentioned that you are working on a couple of new books. Can you tell us about those?
Yeah, so the books I have out right now, It's Over, It's Eden, is a standalone first contact novel. So you want to read one book, you got that. If you want to read two books in a duology, I have the Displacement duology. And it's really interesting looking at a writer's work. You can see how much they change as a writer from book 1 to book 2, and then maybe in book 4 or 5 they begin to get their stride. And so I tried to do that purposefully with my own catalog of books, give myself one book to kind of test things out, and slowly grow towards the long series, which are the things that as a reader I really enjoy. Finding a fantasy or a sci-fi series where, man, there's 8 books here and I can dive into this whole universe. And, book 8 is, how did we even get here from book 1? I wanted that challenge for myself as a writer. So that's what I'm working on right now. I'm in developmental edits, which are structural edits for a book that my social media folks have termed Universal Pulse, because I don't have the actual title out right now. And it is a science fiction space opera epic, book one. It is going to be a big chunky doorstopper, I think. And to balance that out, I wrote a short novella, which is a humorous fantasy tale, and I wrote it on a train trip out to Pasadena for the Nebula Conference, which is put on by the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers Association. And so it's really interesting. You're always moving and growing as a writer or as a creator when you're working on something that maybe is very labor intensive, has a lot of thought, a lot of strategy, trying to get characters to line up at the right place at the right time, and your plot outline. And sometimes you just feel a pull like, oh, I'm going to write a short little fantasy novella that provides a bit of a respite from that.
You are part of Nicole and Rebecca Conquer Books, in which you do coach other aspiring writers. If you could just tell us a bit about how that works.
So the sister who gave me the journal before going into the Peace Corps, her name is Nicole. And when I got back, we started writing a shared memoir together, and we finished it, but it's one of those books in a drawer where the timing maybe just isn't right, or we want to get a little bit of the story, which is our real lives, out before doing something with it. But we began to think, well, what else can we do in the writing space? And we started a book blog that was just a wide, like every book we would, review, write about. It was open to all genres. And then we saw that we were both narrowing in on science fiction and fantasy and other speculative fictions. And then what happened was writers started approaching us saying, hey, I liked your review of this book. Would you take a look at what I'm working on and give me some feedback? And so it was a very organic entry into editing for other writers, helping provide that perspective, helping brainstorm and problem solve some of those plot issues. But what we were finding was, we could help somebody edit a book, but like writing the book, even editing it, even finishing it, like that's all just stage one. Then you have this other big box that you're trying to open and you can't get into it, and that's like producing the book. Either traditionally, where you secure a literary agent, they pitch your book to publishing houses, and then they kind of take on the bulk of the work of getting the book onto bookstore shelves, or as an independent author where you are driving the ship, making decisions and figuring out, well, how do you format an ebook? What is hiring a cover designer to make a cover even look like? Answering all of those questions for yourself. So what we found was that though we really enjoyed the editing process, it was more fulfilling for us to work as book coaches, where we were pairing great editing services with kind of all the exterior things that go along with it. Sometimes I work with an author and it really is focused on writer's block. It really focuses on some of those, abstract issues that an individual is dealing with. Other times, the writer, where they are at in their career, is they really want to focus in on the technical things of trying to get their book produced. Or maybe they're switching genres from, romance to fantasy, and they want to get up to speed quickly. A lot of my clients are individuals who they have this whole other professional career. Oftentimes they're very practiced and good at it, but they're looking for a creative outlet. And because they have done so well for themselves in their professional career, they know that one of the quickest ways to engage with something new is to hire a support team, a coach who can identify, okay, this week 1, this is what we're doing. Week 2, this is what you got to do. Week 3, let's talk about these discussion items so we can narrow in, somebody who can ask the right questions at the right time and reaffirm that you're on track with those things.
We're almost out of time. What is your best advice for students who are considering careers in writing? They want to be an author. What can they be doing now while they're still in college?
I would say 2 things for an aspiring writer. One would be have a wide variety of experiences. Get off campus, travel if you can, get a job somewhere weird, connect with people you never thought you'd connect with before. A lot of writing is drawing on life experiences, and even just going to try out a new hobby or going to a new location once, like even just a short time with something new, can give you some perspective to build into your writing, generate some ideas for you. And then the second thing would be to really focus on your creative writing while you're here. It doesn't have to wait. For a lot of writers, even traditionally published, very successful writers, they have a day job in another field. So they're working during the day and then writing maybe when they get home at night, writing during their lunch break, doing weekend retreats. Even for people who are working full-time as a writer like me, where writing is my day job, that still balances out with admin and marketing tasks. You're doing a lot of juggling, you're doing a lot of prioritizing, and you always have to keep your writing first and foremost. So though you're busy with classes, you're busy with clubs and extracurriculars and, travel and family stuff, even if it's a short amount of time, build that into your schedule, make it a regular habit, and when you feel ready, share that writing with people you trust, asking a professor if they'd look at a creative piece, asking a friend who is a huge reader, and thinking about how to even just learn how to take feedback is a big skill. Even putting yourself out there that way is a big skill. When you write creatively for the first time, you're looking at your laptop screen and you're cringing, and that is something that you have to learn how to work through to get to the finished product. And so starting that as soon as you can, even if it's just micro flash fiction, short stories, you don't have to dive straight into a book, but you can be writing now.
Even after our discussion today, Rebecca, I think there's a lot more people can learn from you. How can they get in touch or follow your work?
You can visit me at RebeccaMZornow, ZORNOW.com. That's my author website, and if you sign up for my newsletter, you'll get a free short story to test out my writing. It's about a paleontologist who goes to a newly discovered planet and finds a huge secret. And you can also find me at conquerbooks.com if you're looking for writing resources, if you're interested in coaching, want to read some of our blog posts and reviews. Or if you want to try out that fantasy ball, go to foxdelight.com for information about events.
And I'll put links to all of those in the description below. Rebecca Zornow, Lawrence University class of 2010, thank you so much for joining us. This was a lot of fun. I enjoyed talking to you and learning so much about writing here on the Lawrence University Career Center podcast.
This was a lot of fun to think back to Lawrence days, so thank you very much.